can't just walk away from this. You ruined everything, and you're gonna pay for it. The police are here.
Imagine standing in a parking garage, minding your own business, when suddenly you're surrounded, cornered, and verbally attacked, not because of what you did, but because of the color of your skin. Now imagine your attackers have no idea that in less than an hour, they'll be standing before you in a courtroom, begging for mercy. This is the story of Judge Adrienne Lattimore, a woman who spent years climbing the ladder of justice, only to face the ugliest side of humanity in a place she thought was safe. What happened next exposed not just the racism she endured, but the shocking arrogance of those who believed they were untouchable. Before we dive in, ask yourself, how would you respond if you witnessed this? Would you stay silent, or would you speak up? Judge Adrienne Lattimore had always been a woman of quiet strength. At 42, she carried herself with a kind of grace that commanded respect without demanding it. Her dark brown eyes held the weight of 1,000 stories, stories of struggle, perseverance, and triumph against odds that would have broken most people. She wore her natural hair in a sleek bun, professional yet unapologetically herself, a small act of resistance in a world that constantly told black women to conform. The courthouse parking garage was her daily routine. Every morning at 7:45 a.m., she'd pull into her reserved spot on Level B, Section 7. It was a ritual she cherished, those quiet moments before the chaos of the courtroom, before the weight of life-altering decisions pressed down on her shoulders. She'd sit in her car for 5 minutes, sipping coffee from her favorite thermos, mentally preparing for whatever cases awaited her. This particular morning started like any other. The November air was crisp as she descended the concrete ramp into the dimly lit garage. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the rows of vehicles. She parked her black sedan, gathered her briefcase and robe from the passenger seat, and stepped out, her heels clicking against the cold concrete. That's when she heard it, a car door slamming, followed by raised voices echoing off the walls. She glanced over instinctively. 2 people were arguing near a large black SUV parked in the handicapped spot just 3 spaces down. A white woman in a maroon suit was gesturing wildly, her voice shrill and cutting through the morning silence. Beside her stood a white man in a navy blue suit, his face red with frustration as he fumbled with something near the vehicle's front tire. Adrienne had seen enough domestic disputes to recognize tension, but something about this felt different. The woman's voice carried an edge that set off alarm bells. Still, it wasn't her business. She had a full docket today, 3 cases, including a high-profile discrimination lawsuit that had already attracted media attention. She needed to focus. She locked her car and started walking toward the elevator, her pace steady and deliberate. The garage was mostly empty at this hour, save for a handful of scattered vehicles and the security cameras mounted on concrete pillars marked with section numbers, 12B, B7, B3. She'd walked this path hundreds of times. It was safe, familiar, or so she thought. But as she moved past the SUV, the woman's voice suddenly changed direction. "Excuse me! Excuse me!" Adrienne's stomach tightened. She knew that tone. She'd heard it before in courtrooms, in restaurants, in stores, that aggressive, entitled demand for attention. She kept walking, her grip tightening on her briefcase. "I'm talking to you!" The woman's heels clicked rapidly against the concrete, growing closer. Adrienne stopped. Not because she wanted to, but because she had learned long ago that sometimes engaging was safer than fleeing. She turned slowly, her expression neutral, professional. The woman in the maroon suit was now standing directly in her path, blocking the way to the elevator. Up close, she could see the rage in her eyes, the way her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. The man in the blue suit had risen from his crouched position by the SUV and was now walking over, his expression somewhere between embarrassment and curiosity. Behind them,
Adrienne noticed two police officers emerging from a patrol car near the entrance. They were too far away to hear the exchange, but close enough to be aware something was happening. "Can I help you?" Adrienne asked calmly, her voice steady, despite the unease crawling up her spine. The woman's eyes raked over her, taking in every detail, her professional attire, her briefcase, her presence. And then came the look, that unmistakable look of disgust mixed with suspicion, a look Adrienne had seen too many times in her life. "What are you doing here?" the woman demanded, her voice dripping with accusation. "This is a restricted area. These spots are for court employees only." Adrienne felt the familiar heat rising in her chest. Here we go again.
For a moment, Adrienne just stared at the woman, processing the absurdity of the question. She'd been parking in this garage for 3 years. She had a reserved spot with her name literally painted on the concrete, Judge A. Lattimore. But before she could respond, the woman stepped closer, her voice rising to a near shriek. "Did you hear me? I asked what you're doing here. You can't just park wherever you want." The man in the blue suit shifted uncomfortably. "Honey, maybe we should just—" "No, Richard," the woman snapped, whirling on him. "I'm tired of people thinking they can do whatever they want. This is exactly what's wrong with this country. No respect for rules." Adrienne's jaw tightened. She knew exactly what this was. It wasn't about parking. It wasn't about rules. This was about a black woman existing in a space where this couple believed she didn't belong. She'd faced this her entire career, the assumption that she was a defendant, a witness, a secretary, anything but what she actually was. "I'm parked in my assigned spot," Adrienne said evenly, gesturing toward her vehicle, "and I'm going to be late for work if you don't let me pass." The woman's face flushed crimson. "Your assigned spot? Don't lie to me. I know exactly who parks where, and that spot is not for—" She stopped herself, but the implication hung heavy in the air between them. "Not for people like you." The words didn't need to be spoken. They were written all over her face, in the curl of her lip, in the way she stood blocking Adrienne's path like a gatekeeper of privilege. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think is happening here," Adrienne began, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel creeping in. "But I need you to move so I can get to work." "Show me your ID," the woman demanded, crossing her arms. "Prove you're supposed to be here." Richard finally found his voice. "Sweetheart, this is getting out of hand. Let's just—" "No, Richard," the woman snapped, whirling on him. "I'm tired of people thinking they can do whatever they want. This is exactly what's wrong with this country. No respect for rules." Adrienne's jaw tightened. She knew exactly what this was. It wasn't about parking. It wasn't about rules. This was about a black woman existing in a space where this couple believed she didn't belong. She'd faced this her entire career, the assumption that she was a defendant, a witness, a secretary, anything but what she actually was. "I'm parked in my assigned spot," Adrienne said evenly, gesturing toward her vehicle. "And I'm going to be late for work if you don't let me pass." The woman's face flushed crimson. "Your assigned spot? Don't lie to me. I know exactly who parks where, and that spot is not for—" She stopped herself, but the implication hung heavy in the air between them. "Not for people like you." The words didn't need to be spoken. They were written all over her face, in the curl of her lip, in the way she stood blocking Adrienne's path like a gatekeeper of privilege. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think is happening here," Adrienne began, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel creeping in. "But I need you to move so I can get to work." "Show me your ID," the woman demanded, crossing her arms. "Prove you're supposed to be here." Richard finally found his voice. "Sweetheart, this is getting out of hand. Let's just—" "No, Richard," the woman snapped, whirling on him. "I'm tired of people thinking they can do whatever they want. This is exactly what's wrong with this country. No respect for rules." The two police officers who had been watching from a distance started walking over, their hands resting casually on their belts. Adrienne's heart sank. She knew how this could go. She'd seen enough cases cross her bench to know that even being in the right didn't always protect black people when police got involved.
One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and this situation could spiral into something far worse than humiliation. "Is there a problem here?" one of the officers asked as they approached. He was older, probably nearing retirement, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too much. The woman immediately turned to him, her demeanor shifting from aggressive to distressed in an instant. "Officer, thank God, this woman is parked illegally in a spot reserved for court personnel, and when I confronted her, she became hostile and aggressive." Adrienne's blood ran cold. Hostile? Aggressive? She hadn't raised her voice once, but she knew how this game was played. She'd watched it unfold countless times in her courtroom. The weaponization of white tears, the instant credibility given to certain voices over others. "Ma'am," the younger officer addressed Adrienne, his hand moving to his radio, "can you show us some identification?" This was the moment. This was where Adrienne had to make a choice. She could pull out her judicial ID, flash her credentials, and watch this entire situation evaporate. These people would grovel, apologize, maybe even cry. But something in her resisted. Why should she have to prove her right to exist in a space that was legally hers? Why should her dignity depend on a title, a badge, a position of power? What about all the black people who didn't have those shields? What happened to them in moments like these? "I'd like to know why I'm being asked for ID when I haven't broken any laws," Adrienne said carefully, her legal training kicking in. "Am I being detained?" The older officer sighed. "Nobody's detaining anyone. We're just trying to sort out what's going on. What's going on is that I tried to get to work, and this woman blocked my path and demanded I prove I have a right to be here. I haven't committed any crime. I haven't violated any parking rules. I'm standing in front of my own vehicle in my assigned parking space." The woman in the maroon suit scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Richard, show them the parking pass. We're here for our court date, and this woman is clearly trying to intimidate us." Their court date. The words clicked into place in Adrienne's mind like puzzle pieces. She glanced at the man. Richard really looked at him for the first time. His face. She'd seen it before. In case files, in photographs submitted as evidence, and suddenly she knew exactly who they were. Richard and Monica Caldwell, the defendants in the 9:30 a.m. discrimination case on her docket. The couple being sued by their former employee, a young black woman who claimed they'd subjected her to racist harassment, verbal abuse, and wrongful termination. She'd spent the previous evening reviewing their case, reading through pages of depositions, text messages, and witness statements that painted a disturbing picture of systematic racism masked as workplace standards. And now, here they were, in her parking garage, doing exactly what they'd been accused of doing. The irony was almost too perfect. "Ma'am, just show us your ID and we can clear this up," the younger officer pressed, clearly wanting to end this encounter and move on with his day. Adrienne could feel the weight of the moment. She thought about all the women who'd stood where she was standing, all the black people who'd been demanded to prove themselves worthy of basic respect, basic humanity. She thought about the young woman who had filed the lawsuit against the Caldwells, who'd found the courage to stand up despite knowing she'd be called a liar, called aggressive, called everything but what she was, a victim. "I'll show you my ID," Adrienne said slowly, reaching into her briefcase, "but I want it noted that I'm only doing so under protest and that I was unlawfully stopped while trying to access my workplace." Monica Caldwell let out an exaggerated laugh. "Oh, here we go. Everything's unlawful. Everything's discrimination. This is exactly the problem with—" "Mrs. Caldwell," the older officer cut her off, his eyes narrowing. "Let's let the lady get her ID." Adrienne pulled out her credentials. Not the judicial ID. Not yet. First, she showed her courthouse employee badge, the one that clearly stated her parking authorization. The officers leaned in to examine it, and she watched their expressions shift from neutral to confused. "You work at the courthouse?" the younger officer asked. "I do," Adrienne confirmed. Monica Caldwell snatched at the badge, but Adrienne pulled it back. "I'm a janitor," Monica interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "A clerk? That still doesn't explain why you're parked in a judge's spot." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to stop buzzing. The two police officers exchanged glances. Richard Caldwell's face had gone pale, and Adrienne, for the first time that morning, allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile. "Actually," she said quietly, pulling out her judicial credentials and holding them up for everyone to see, "I am the judge, Judge Adrienne Lattimore, and unless I'm mistaken, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, I'll be seeing you in my courtroom in approximately," she glanced at her watch, "45 minutes." The color drained from Monica Caldwell's face. Richard looked like he might be sick, and the officers immediately stepped back, their postures shifting from authoritative to apologetic. And in that moment, suspended in the fluorescent-lit silence of a parking garage, the tables had completely turned around. "Your Honor, we had no idea," but Adrienne wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Monica Caldwell, watching the realization crash over her like a wave, watching her understand that she'd just proven in vivid detail every single allegation in the lawsuit she was about to defend herself against.
Time seemed to freeze in that parking garage. The sound of distant traffic faded away. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Monica Caldwell's face as the blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and trembling. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish pulled from water, desperate and drowning in the consequences of her own actions. I didn't—" Monica's voice came out as a whisper, then cracked entirely. "Your Honor, we were just—" Richard Caldwell had gone completely rigid, his eyes wide with horror. He understood what his wife apparently still couldn't grasp, that in the span of 10 minutes, in this cold concrete garage, they'd handed their opponent every piece of ammunition they'd need to win their case. Every word Monica had spoken, every accusation she'd hurled, every assumption she'd made, it was all recorded on the security cameras mounted on those concrete pillars. Every second of it captured in high definition. "Please," Richard finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse. "Your Honor, my wife didn't mean—" "Didn't mean what, Mr. Caldwell?" Adrienne's voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath was a current of fury that had been building for 42 years. "Didn't mean to assume I was a criminal because I'm black? Didn't mean to demand I prove my right to exist in a space I've earned? Didn't mean to lie to police officers and call me hostile and aggressive when I was standing here, calmly, trying to get to work?" Monica found her voice again, and with it came desperation. "You can't hold this against us. This has nothing to do with the case. You're biased now. You have to recuse yourself." The audacity of it took Adrienne's breath away. After everything, after the harassment, the false accusations, the attempt to weaponize police against her, this woman was now trying to make herself the victim, trying to claim that Adrienne's very presence, her very existence as the target of racism, somehow disqualified her from doing her job. "Mrs. Caldwell," Adrienne said, and her voice could have cut glass, "I've been a judge for 3 years. In that time, I've presided over 2,000 cases. I've ruled against people I liked and in favor of people I didn't like. I've sent people to prison who reminded me of my own father, and I've freed people who disgusted me. Do you know why? Because I understand something you clearly don't. That justice isn't about feelings. It's about facts, evidence, and the law." She took a step forward, and Monica instinctively stepped back. "What happened here this morning, it's not going to influence my ruling, but it is going to become part of the record. Because Mrs. Thompson's attorneys have a right to know that while you're in my courtroom claiming you never discriminated against her, you spent this morning doing exactly what she accused you of doing. To me, a sitting judge." "Your Honor, please," Richard tried again, his voice breaking. But Adrienne held up her hand. "I'm not finished. You want to talk about bias? Let's talk about the bias that made your wife see a black woman in professional attire and assume she was a criminal. Let's talk about the bias that made her think she had the right to demand I prove myself worthy of basic respect. Let's talk about the bias that made her lie to police officers knowing that her word would be believed over mine, knowing that she was weaponizing their authority against me." The two police officers stood frozen,
clearly uncomfortable witnesses to this unraveling. The younger one had his hand on his radio, as if hoping for any excuse to escape. The older one just looked sad, like he'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Mrs. Caldwell's face had gone from pale to red, tears streaming down her cheeks now. But Adrienne couldn't tell if they were tears of shame or fury. With people like this, it was often hard to distinguish between genuine remorse and anger at being caught. "I have never been so insulted in my entire life!" she choked out between sobs. "Richard, do something! She can't talk to us like this!" And there was the final proof. Even now, even after being exposed, Monica Caldwell couldn't see herself as anything but the wronged party. She couldn't comprehend that she was the perpetrator, not the victim, that her tears didn't erase her actions. "Officers," Adrienne said, turning to the police, "I'd like to file a formal complaint about being falsely accused of hostility and aggression. I'd also like to request the security footage from this garage for the time period of 7:45 to 8:15 a.m. today." "Yes, Your Honor," the older officer responded immediately. "We'll get that processed right away." Adrienne looked back at the Caldwells one last time. "I'll see you in court at 9:30. I suggest you use the next 40 minutes to have a very honest conversation with your attorney about what just happened here, because Mrs. Thompson's attorneys are about to have a field day with this." She turned and walked toward the elevator, her head high, her briefcase clutched in her steady hand. Behind her, she could hear Monica's sobs echoing off the concrete walls, Richard's desperate whispers trying to calm her down. She pressed the elevator button and waited, refusing to look back. The doors opened. She stepped inside. And as they closed, shutting out the chaos of the parking garage, Judge Adrienne Lattimore finally allowed herself to breathe.
The courtroom was packed. Word had spread fast. Courthouse staff had their ways of communicating. And by 9:15 a.m., everyone knew what had happened in the parking garage. Adrienne could feel the eyes on her as she took her seat at the bench, the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. Mrs. Thompson sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorneys, a young black woman in her 20s whose courage had brought this case forward. The Caldwells sat across from her, Monica's eyes red and swollen, Richard staring straight ahead like a man facing execution. The case proceeded exactly as the law required. Adrienne recused herself from ruling on the discrimination claims, not because of bias, but because she'd become a material witness. The parking garage incident would be added to the evidence, and a different judge would make the final determination. But before transferring the case, Adrienne made sure the security footage was officially entered into the record. Every word Monica had spoken, every assumption she'd made, every lie she'd told. Mrs. Thompson's attorneys didn't need to say much. The footage spoke for itself, a perfect, undeniable demonstration of the exact pattern of behavior their client had been describing for months. Monica Caldwell had proven every allegation true. Not through a smoking gun or a damning email, but through her own inability to see black women as anything other than threats to be controlled, challenges to be neutralized. The case settled 3 days later. The Caldwells agreed to pay Mrs. Thompson substantial damages, issue a public apology, and attend mandatory diversity training, though Adrienne doubted that any training could undo a lifetime of ingrained prejudice. But at least Mrs. Thompson got her day in court. At least her truth was validated. For Adrienne, though, the impact went deeper than one case, one verdict. That morning in the parking garage had torn open something she'd spent years trying to suppress, the exhaustion of constantly having to prove herself worthy of basic dignity. She'd built her entire career on the belief that excellence would shield her, that achievements would speak louder than prejudice. But Monica Caldwell had reminded her of a harsh truth. To some people, no amount of success would ever make her worthy. Her blackness would always be seen first, her humanity always questioned. In the weeks that followed, Adrienne became an inadvertent symbol. The story spread beyond the courthouse. Local news picked it up, then national outlets, then social media. Judge confronts racist couple in parking garage became a rallying cry.
a moment of justice that people desperately needed to see. Adrienne gave one interview, carefully chosen, where she spoke not about revenge or vindication, but about the countless Black people who faced similar situations without the protection of a title or position. I could show my credentials and make it stop, but what about the people who can't? What about the Black teenagers stopped by police for looking suspicious? What about the professionals questioned in their own office buildings? What about the parents followed through stores because someone assumed they were shoplifting? My moment in that garage was visible because of who I am, but these moments happen every day to people who don't have the power to make them visible. The interview went viral. It sparked conversations in workplaces, schools, and homes across the country. Some people praised her. Others accused her of playing the race card or making it about race when it was just a misunderstanding. Those comments didn't surprise her. She knew that for every person willing to acknowledge racism, there would be 10 more willing to explain it away. But what mattered most to Adrienne wasn't the public reaction. It was the private messages, hundreds of them, from Black women especially, sharing their own parking garage moments, their own elevator incidents, their own confrontations in spaces where they had every right to exist. Each message was a reminder that her experience wasn't unique, but universal, that the fight wasn't just legal, but deeply, painfully personal. 3 months after that November morning, Adrienne still parks in the same spot. She still takes those 5 quiet minutes in her car, sipping coffee and preparing for the day. But now she's more aware of the cameras, the witnesses, the documentation that can protect her if it happens again. Because she knows it will. Racism doesn't end with one viral video or one settled case. It adapts, evolves, finds new ways to assert itself. Yet she also knows that visibility matters, accountability matters. Every time someone like Monica Caldwell faces consequences for their actions, it sends a message that this behavior isn't acceptable anymore. It won't be tolerated. It won't be ignored. Judge Adrienne Lattimore continues to serve on the bench, ruling on cases with the same fairness and integrity she always has. But now she carries something else too, a deeper understanding of why her work matters, not just because she upholds the law, but because she represents possibility, proof that Black women can rise, can excel, can claim spaces that were never meant for them, and proof that when challenged, when attacked, when told they don't belong, they can stand firm and refuse to disappear. The question isn't whether racism will continue. It will. The question is whether we'll keep fighting it, keep documenting it, keep refusing to let it hide in the shadows.